How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Kuf Yud, Daf 110 of Masechta Yevamos. Friends, I gotta roll up my sleeves. What should we talk about while I'm rolling up my sleeves? Oh, let's talk about the Daf. Alright, well, today's Daf, the first part we talk about when you have a fellow who's married to a Ketana, so it's only Midrabanan, and then she becomes an adult. So we discussed at the end of the Daf yesterday that according to Rav, once she becomes an adult, she then needs to have bia. They need to have bia in order for her to become married midoraisa. We're going to have a look at that. And then we're going to get to a new Mishnah where we discuss whether a person who is deaf and dumb, deaf mute, is able to do chalitza. So, yeah, we're going to have to use our brains today. Also, get ready. Tomorrow we have a headache daf. Remember, we haven't had a headache daf in a while. You remember at the beginning of the Masechta? And like daf 10, 11, 12, like those were like headache dafs. Like a mamish needed like Advil. I think tomorrow's going to be a headache daf. Today's not so easy either. Alright, so... Oh, the sirens are going. The sirens. They like the sirens. It makes them very loud. Alright. So, says the Gemara, we're on Daf Kuf Tes, and we base 3 lines from the bottom. B'sova Rav, Ibo Alin, Ilo Bo Alo. Oh! Alright, who can remind me what this is talking about? This is talking about... so it's talking about where... Right. It all goes back based to the Mishnah, right? The Mishnah was talking about a situation where you have Ruvain and Shimon are brothers, Sarah and Rivka are sisters. Oh my gosh, this was like, mamash at the beginning of the Masechta, that was like every day. Reuben and Shimon are brothers, Sarah and Rivka are sisters, and this and that, and this. So anyways, that's basically where we're coming full circle of here in Masechta Yevamos. So Reuven and Shimon are brothers, Sarah and Rivka are sisters, and they're both orphans. Sarah is a adult, Rivka is a minor. Reuven is married to Sarah, Shimon's married to Rivka. It's like going back to the beginning of the Masechta. You have to like set up the case before you could then start discussing it. Reuven dies, so now Shimon needs to do Yibum with Sarah. Now the thing is, he's married to Rivka. Rivka though is a minor, so he's only married to Rivka midor Abonon, but he has a chiyuv of Yibum with Sarah midor Raisa. So the opinion of Rabbi Gamliel, so the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer was that we basically nudge Rivka to do Meyun, to just say to Shimon that she's bouncing, and then Shimon can do Yibum with Sarah. Now, according to Rabbi Gamliel, however, he says, no, we don't do that. If Rivka wants to stay with Shimon, she could stay with Shimon. And then, when she becomes an adult, then she becomes married to Shimon midor Raisa. And then, if Rivka is married to Shimon midor Raisa, so then Memele, Sarah doesn't have a chiyuv yibum anymore because she's a sister of Shimon's wife, Rivka. And therefore, Sarah can go and live her best life, and she doesn't have to worry about yibum and chalitza anymore. So, now the shaila was, when Rivka becomes an adult, does she automatically become married to Shimon, or do they have to have bia? And only once they have bia, so then they had bia as two adults, and now she's married to midor Raisa. So that was the shaila. Rav said they have to have bia. So with that introduction, V'sova Rav ibal in ilo alo. Is that really true? That Rav's opinion is that if Shimon and Rivka have bia once she is an adult, so then they are considered married. But if they don't have bia, then they would not be considered married. But it was stated, Kitana shelo me'ano v'egdila. If you have a kitana and she did not do me'un, she stayed with her husband, and and v'egdila, and she became an adult. Ve'omdo v'nises, and then she got married to somebody else as an adult. So Rav Amar ein tzricha get misheni. So Rav says that she does not need a get from the second one because she was already married to the first husband from the time that she was a katana. V'shmuel amar tzricha get misheni, where Shmuel says that you need a get from the second one. because it's not like she's considered to be married to the original husband. Let's go weiter for a second. My lav lo ba'al. And we want to say that it's talking about where they did not have bia. So what's talking about? So we want to say right now that this is talking about a situation where, I don't know, let's just make up names, okay? You have Ruvain is married to Sarah. Sarah is a katana. Now, it says, right, Vigdila, and she becomes now an adult. So Ruvain and Sarah are now together. She's an adult. Now, we want to assume, my lav de lo ba'al, that they did not yet have bia. Right, so she became an adult, Sarah became an adult, but Reuven and Sarah have not yet had bia. And we're saying, Ve'omda v'nises, and then she got married to somebody else, let's call him Shimon. So Rav Omar, Eina tzricha get misheni. Rav says that Sarah does not need to get a get from Shimon because she was already married to Reuven. She can't be married to two people at once, so she doesn't even need a get from Shimon. Shmuel, on the other hand, says that she will need a get from Shimon because we do not consider them to be married. And we want to say that it's talking about a situation where, right, meaning according to Shmuel, we do not consider Reuven and Sarah to be married, and therefore she would need a get from, again, we do not consider Reuven and Sarah to be married, therefore Sarah would need a get from Shimon. Now, we want to assume it's talking about a situation where they did not have bia from the time that she became an adult, right? Reuven and Sarah did not have bia from the time that she became an adult. And we're saying that, according to Rav, she does not need a get. So there you go. That even without bia, they're considered married, and therefore she does not need a get from Shimon because it's irrelevant. She was already married to Reuven. Lo de ba'al. The Gemara says no. It's talking about where they did have bia. And because they had bia, so that's why they're considered married, and that's why Rav says that she doesn't need to get from Shimon because she had bia with Reuven as an adult, and therefore she's married to Reuven, and she doesn't need to get from Shimon. Fine. But idebal, my time with the Shmuel. But if they had bia from when she was an adult, from when Sarah was an adult, so Memela she's married to Reuven, right? In which case, why would Shmuel say that she would need a get from Shimon? Obviously, she's married to Reuven, not Shimon. So because according to Shmuel, he holds that, look, they've been living together for a long time. Reuven and Sarah, who knows when they got married? I don't know, maybe they got married when she was 8. They've been married for a while. All of a sudden, she becomes an adult. They have bia. He's not necessarily thinking like, oh right, now she's an adult, we're having bia l'shem kiddushin. Not necessarily, he's just having bia with her. So, according to Rav, we assume that, well, if now that she's an adult and they're having bia, so then he's having bia l'shem kiddushin, right? And right, so what does Rashi say? If you get misheni the beila shabala rishonim mishagala stam l'shem kiddushin is kavin to yodei yoshem kiddushin ketana klum. Right, Rashi says that memele when Reuven has bia with Sarah once she is an adult, he's doing it l'shem kiddushin, and therefore they're considered married, and that is why Rav says that Sarah would not need to get from Shimon. According to Shmuel, however, he would say lav davka when Reuven and Sarah have bia when she's an adult. He's doing it just like he had bia the week before. You know, like they got married when she was 8 or whatever, and they've been together since then, and this is no different. And therefore, Shmuel says that just because they had bia when they're older when she's an adult doesn't necessarily make her married, and that is why she would need to get from Shimon. If he married her at that point. Okay, fine. Weiter. So, okay, fine. So we see that Rav says, so Rav says that she would have to have bia, and we see a machlokas between Rav and Shmuel about, Rav says that the bia that she has now is going to make them married, where Shmuel says that stam bia is going to be based on the initial marriage, not by default, to have kiddushin midoraisa right now. The Gemara asks, but don't Rav and Shmuel already argue about this one time? The Itmar was stated, Kidsha al Tnai. If Reuven was Mekadesh Sarah with a stipulation, he betrothed Sarah with a stipulation that she doesn't have any nidarim or something. V'chansa stam, but then when it came a time for nisuin, for marriage, to actually get married, all of a sudden the stipulation went away. He didn't mention, okay, we're getting married under the condition that you don't have nedarim. Rav Amar Tzricha Menu Get. Rav says, okay, it's a real marriage, and if they want to get divorced, she would need a get. Ushmuel Amar Ein Tzricha Menu Get. And Shmuel says, no, she would not need a get, i.e., they're not married. Rav Amar Tzricha Menu Get. Rav says that she would need a get from him because Kevan Denazva Achuli Achla L'Tnoi, because when they get married, so then he's mevatel his initial Tanai, right? Meaning, Rav says, look, when they got engaged, so then he said, I'm getting engaged to you based on the condition that you don't have Nidarim. Turns out that he does have Nidarim, and it turns out that she does have Nidarim, and he decides to go ahead with the marriage anyways. Okay, so he's going ahead with the marriage, they get married, and that is that. Right? The fact that they're getting married now means that they're now married, even if prior there was a certain stipulation. Where Shmuel says that they're not going to be considered married, and she would not need from him a get if they want to get divorced, because kol haboel al das kiddushin harishonim uboel. Because just like we had seen from Shmuel earlier, that anybody that when they have bia, it's going to be with the intention of al das kiddushin harishonim, based on the initial kiddushin, which was with a certain condition that she doesn't have any nidarim, and she does have nidarim. So therefore, memele, the initial condition was not met, and therefore they would not be considered to be married, and therefore she would not need a get. So what do we see? So we see that Rav is going based on the bia that happens right now, and Shmuel is saying the bia is based on the initial status, is based on the initial kiddushin. So we already see this machlokas over here by this kiddushin on a Tanai. Why do we also need to have it then when it comes to this Kitana, who then becomes a Gedola? And we see that Rav says that when they have Bia now, it will be the Shem Kiddushin, where Shmuel says that it's based on the initial Kiddushin, and therefore they're not considered married. So Tzricha, we need both cases. The Yit Marahi, because if we'd only have the case of the getting married on Tanai, Be'ahi Ka'amar Rav, that's where Rav says that we go based on the marriage that he decides to go forward with, because Mishum De'ika Tano'a, B'chevin De'bo'al Achle L'Tano'e, because Rav says, look, initially he was Mekadesh with a certain stipulation. Conspicuously, when they got married, it was without that stipulation. Clearly, he saw that, okay, fine, he betrothed her under the condition that she doesn't have Nidarim. It turns out that she does have certain vows that she's made. But he decides anyways, you know what, I want to go forward, and they get married, and he doesn't say anything about the Nidarim. Clearly, his intention is that he's interested in getting married even without the Nidar, even though she has those Nidarim, right? That he's nonetheless willing to get married right now. But when it comes to a Ketana, that she now becomes an adult, I'll say that maybe he agrees with Shmuel in that case, that when he's having Bia with her, he has Bia with her with the same intention that he had with her every other time when she was a Ketana. That he didn't necessarily have intention right now, l'shem kiddushin per se. And if we would only have the situation of the Ketana, that is where Shmuel says that by the Ketana, when she becomes a Gedola, we assume that he's still having Bia with her with the same intention based on the initial Kiddushin when she was a Ketana, and therefore they're not considered married. But I might think that in the case where they got betrothed with, and there was a Tanai, and then they got married without the Tanai, maybe you would agree with Rav that the marriage supersedes the Kiddushin that was on Tanai. So Tzricha, therefore we need both cases to teach that in both cases, Rav says that we go based on the Bia that happens now, and Shmuel says that the Bia is based on the initial Kiddushin that happened earlier. Okay, fine. But again, we ask the same question. Does Rav really hold that specifically when this Ketana becomes an adult, so then they have to have Bia in order for them to be considered married midoraisa, and if not, then they're still only married midorabon. There's an incident that happened in Narish, and there was a girl who was betrothed when she was a Ketana, and she became an adult, and they put her in some kind of a fancy carriage that they were going to take her to her wedding, and then somebody else came and chapped her arayin. He was mikadesh her on her way to her wedding. Rav Brona, Rav Chananel, Talmidei de Rav Havu Osam, and Rav Brona and Rav Chananel, who were students of Rav, were over there. And they said that she doesn't need a get from the chaper ariner, from the second fellow. So what do we see? We see that even though there was no bia, she was on her way to her wedding, and there was no bia yet, and still the students of Rav were saying that no, she's married to the original husband, and she does not need a get from the chaper ariner. Omer of Papa Benarish Mitzv Nesive V'Adam Mosve Abe Kursayet, which Rav Papa says meh. That's what he says. So Rav Papa says meh. He says that in Narish, where this event took place, where this incident took place, the minig is that first they have Nisuin, i.e. first they would have bia, and only afterwards would they go on this fancy carriage thing. And therefore, by the time that she was on the fancy carriage, they already had bia, in which case, that's why she was married, Midor Isa. And the chaper ariner stands no chance. Rav Ashi Omar, Rav Ashi says, "Hu asu shaloi kahogen lefichach asu bo shaloi kahogen." The chaper ariner did something inappropriate, and therefore we act right. He did something not right, so we act with him in a way that's not right, so to speak. Meaning, according to Rav Ashi, they didn't necessarily have bia yet, and generally speaking, they would have to have bia in order to be considered married. So then, why does she not need a get from the chaper ariner? Because the chaper ariner acted inappropriately, so we act inappropriately with him, so to speak. And we take away his kiddushin, the kiddushin that he gave to her, that the chaper ariner gave to her. So then we basically consider it to be null and void. And of course, Bezdin is able to make the kesef kiddushin, the money of the kiddushin, null and void, because hefker Bezdin hefker, as we learned about the other day, that Bezdin can make something hefker, and therefore she's not married. So Ravina says to Rav Ashi, well, that's all fine and well, or fine and good, whatever the phrase is, if he was mekadosh with money. So hefker Bezdin hefker, and they could say the money is hefker, and there was no kesef kiddushin. But what if he was mekadosh b'biyah? Right? There's no concept of bias, Bezdin, bia, hefker, the bia, hefker, whatever. You can't do it with bia. So Shavir or Rabbanan Levi also be lesnos. Actually, the rabbis can, and they could retroactively say that his sleeping with her was not l'shem kiddushin, it was l'shem znos. So basically, in this case, we say that he acted inappropriately, and therefore we don't let him get away with it. So even if this minor, who's now an adult, and her husband did not have bia after she became an adult, still the chaper ariner wouldn't be able to chaper arayin because we would punish him. Fine. Amr Rav Yehuda Amr Shmuel Halacha Krib Eliezer v'chein Amr Rabbi Elazar Halacha Krib Eliezer. So it says Rav Yehuda in the name of Shmuel, and also Rabbi Elazar says that the halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer, that we teach the ketana to do me'un, so that her husband could marry her sister who's a gedola, right? In the situation of Reuven and Shimon, and Sarah and Rivka. Sarah is an adult, Rivka is a minor, and they're only, right? And then Reuven dies, so then we would teach Rivka to do me'un, so that Shimon and Sarah can do yibum midoraisa. Alright, friends, so now we move on to the next Mishnah. Mi shehaya nasui lishte yisomis. So you have Reuven, and he's married to Sarah and Rivka. Sarah and Rivka are shtei yisomis. They're two orphans, kitanos, who are minors. They're not related, but Reuven is married to Sarah and Rivka. They are both kitanos, so they're married midrabanan. Vameis, and then Reuven would. Biaso chalitzasa shel achas meim. So if Shimon does yibum or chalitza with either Sarah or Rivka, poteres Sarah also. So then, the other one, the Tzara, is, can go live her best life. V'chein shtei chershos, and the same applies to two deaf and mute wives, right? If Sarah and Rivka were deaf and mute, so then Reuven would only be married to them midrabanan, and if Reuven dies, if Shimon does yibum, now the shaila is what about chalitza? But and that's going to be the big shaila for basically the rest of the daf. But if Reuven does yibum with one of them, let's say, so then the other one can live her best life. Ketana v'chereshes, if Reuven is married to Sarah and Rivka, Sarah is a ketana, Rivka is a chereshes, ein bias achas me'en poteres tzarasa, the bia of one of them will not be poter the co-wife, because as Rashi says, we're not exactly sure which one. Rashi says, we don't know which one Reuven was closer with, which one would be considered his wife more, so we don't necessarily know who we should do yibum with. Pikachas v'chereshes, if Reuven is married to a pikachas, somebody who's not deaf mute, so a pikachas, we'll just use that word, I imagine, the rest of the day. So a pikachas, get familiar with that word, that is the one who is not deaf mute, and a chereshes, that is the one who is a deaf mute. Biasa pikachas poteres achereshes. So if Reuven is married to Sarah the pikachas and Rivka the chereshes, and then Reuven dies, so if Shimon does yibum with Sarah the pikachas, so then that will be poter Rivka the chereshes to go and live her best life. Ve'ein biasa chereshes poteres pikachas. But yibum with Rivka the chereshes will not be poter Sarah the pikachas to live her best life. Ve'ein gedola v'ktana, if you have Sarah the gedola and Rivka the ketana, so bias gedola poteres ketana. So if Shimon does yibum with Sarah the gedola, so then Rivka the ketana can go and live her best life. Ve'ein bias ketana poteres gedola. But if Shimon does yibum with Rivka the ketana, that does not enable Sarah the gedola to go and live her best life. And I think that she's taka stuck, because she can't do, she still is kind of like a zika, and she also, I don't know that she could do like yibum. Maybe you could do chalitza in that case, actually. Yeah, maybe in that case you can actually do chalitza, maybe. Okay. Now, says the Gemara, v'chereshes bas chalitza is a chereshes bas chalitza. What does that mean? Well, we had said in the Mishnah that if Reuven was married to Sarah and Rivka, now both Sarah and Rivka are ketanas. So we say that if Reuven dies, Shimon can do yibum or chalitza with either Sarah or Rivka, then the other one goes and lives their best life. Now, we said, and the same applies to chershos, to deaf mutes, right? So if Sarah and Rivka were both chershos, so then it sounds like Shimon can do yibum or chalitza with either Sarah or Rivka, and then the other one can go and live her best life. But one second, can Shimon do yibum with the chereshes? Can Shimon do chalitza with the chereshes? The chereshes bas chalitza is a chereshes one who is able to do chalitza ve'otnan. We learn in the Mishnah. Cheresh nechlatz, if a cheresh got his shoe removed, v'chereshes shecholza, or a chereshes removed a shoe, v'choletzes min ha'kohen, or if there's a minor involved, chalitza psula. So the chalitza does not work. So how come we're saying what does the Mishnah say? V'chein shtei chershos, that the same applies to chershos, but chershos can't do chalitza. Rav Gidol Amar Rav Abiyah. So if Gidol says the name of Rav, easy answer. Okay, when it says v'chein shtei chershos, it's talking about bia. That if Reuven's married to Sarah and Rivka, and they're both chershos, so then if Shimon does yibum with one of them, so then the other one can go and live their best life. But yeah, chalitza is not an option. Fine. Now, Rabba Omar, afilu tema chalitza. Now, Rabba, and this basically takes us for the rest of the daf, is trying to understand the opinion of Rabba. So you're going to have to halt cup. We're going to have to focus. Maybe we should jump in a groove for the rest of the daf. Although hopefully it won't take 50 minutes. But anyways, So Rabba Omar afilu tema achalitza. So Rabba says you can even say that the chershos are doing chalitza. that if Shimon does chalitza with either Sarah or Rivka, so then the other one can go live her best life. So how could we say that a chereshes is doing chalitza? So kan bechereshes meikare, kan bepikachas v'achar kach nischarsha. Well, it depends. Was she deaf? Was she a chereshes at the time that she got married, or was she a pikachas at the time that she got married and became a chereshes later? Chereshes meikara. If we're talking about a chereshes meikara, that when she got married she was a chereshes, so then she can also, when she got married to Reuven she was a chereshes, so then Shimon can do chalitza with her, and she, right, ki echi de'ol hachi nafak, that in the same way that she got married to Reuven midirabanon because she was a chereshes and she signaled to him whatever she needed to signal to him, so the same thing would be with chalitza. You'll get, say you got married midirabanon with signaling, so also the chalitza could be done with signaling instead of reading. Fine. But if at the time that Reuven and they got married, they were pikchos, they were not chershos, so then that marriage is midoraisa. And you cannot do chalitza which requires her to read certain things, and she's unable to read. So in that case, chalitza would be unable to release the zika, and the only option would be to do yibum, and then they can get divorced after if they want. Right, so pikachas v'achar kach nischar shelo, if she was a pikachas when she got married, then she cannot do, and now she's a chereshes, she cannot do chalitza, because the me'akva be'kriya, because she's going to have to read things as part of the chalitza, and she can't. Eis ve'abaye. Now we asked the kasha, that Rabba had said that a chereshes me'ikara is able to do chalitza. We're going to question this. Eis ve'abaye asked the kasha, v'chereshes me'ikara bas chalitza, can a chereshes me'ikara, right? Somebody who was a chereshes when she got married, already at the time of the marriage, can she do chalitza? Ve'atnan. But we learn in a Mishnah, it says a Mishnah on Daf Kuf Yud Beis Amud Beis, as are pretty much, I think, most or a lot of what we're going to quote for the rest of the daf. Shnei achin, you have two brothers, Reuven and Shimon. Echad pikeach ve'echad cheresh. One is a pikeach, one is a cheresh. So Reuven the pikeach and Shimon the cheresh. Nisuin the shtei nachrios are married to two women, Sarah and Rivka. They're not sisters. They're just Sarah and Rivka. Achas pikachas v'achas chereshes. Sarah is a pikachas, Rivka is a chereshes. So Reuven the pikeach is married to Sarah the pikachas. Shimon the cheresh is married to Rivka the chereshes. Meis cheresh bal chereshes. Shimon the cheresh, who's married to Rivka the chereshes, he dies. So mayaise pikeach bal pikachas. So now you have Rivka, the chereshes, who needs to do yibum. So what does Reuven the pikeach do? He's married to Sarah the pikachas, and now there is Rivka the chereshes, so they can't do chalitza because she's a chereshes, Rivka's a chereshes. So kones ve'imratzalot tziyotzi. So Reuven can do yibum with Rivka, and then if they want, they can get divorced, but they cannot do chalitza because Rivka is a chereshes. Meis pikeach ba pikachas. If Reuven the pikeach dies, so now you have Shimon the cheresh who's married to Rivka the chereshes, and now you have Sarah the pikeach who needs to do yibum. So Shimon is unable to do chalitza, right? So mayaisa cheresh bal chereshes. What does Shimon the cheresh do? Kones. So he can marry Sarah the pikachas. Ve'enu motzi la'olam, but he'll never be able to. They're going to have to stay together forever, right? Because he can't do chalitza with her, and he also can't give her a get, because even if he gives her a get, right? If they do yibum, and then he gives her a get, so then his get would only be midrabanan. It would be unable to undo her marriage to Ruvain, who's now dead, but they got married midoraisa, and then through Yibum, she's now getting married to Shimon, but any get that he gives her would be unable to undo her initial marriage to Ruvain. Fine. So what do we see? So we see that both by Rivka the Chereshes, as well as by Shimon the Cheresh, that they're unable to do Chalitza. My lab, the Chereshes meikara, and we want to assume that we're talking about where Rivka the Chereshes is the Chereshes at the time that she got married. She's a Chereshes meikara, Vikatani konis in, and we're saying that if Shimon the Cheresh dies, so Ruvain the Pikeach can do Yibum with Rivka the Chereshes, but kones in choletz lo. But she cannot do Chalitza because she's a Chereshes, and we want to assume that she's a Chereshes meikara. And so we see that a Chereshes meikara cannot do Chalitza. Lo b'pikachas v'achakach nischarsha. No, it's talking about where Rivka was a pikachas at the time that she got married, and only later became a Chereshes, and that is why she cannot do Chalitza. But if she was a Chereshes meikara, then she would be able to do Chalitza. Tashma, come in here. Shnei achin pikrin. So Ruvain and Shimon are brothers, and they're both Pikeachs. Ruvain the Pikeach, Shimon the Pikeach. Nesuin shtei nochrias are married to Sarah and Rivka. Sarah and Rivka are not related. Achas Pikachas v'achas Chereshes. Sarah is a Pikachas, Rivka is a Chereshes. Meis Pikeach ba'al Chereshes. If Shimon the Pikeach was married to Rivka the Chereshes, so Shimon dies. So Mayaisa Pikeach ba'al Pikachas. So what does Ruvain the Pikeach do? He's married to Sarah the Pikachas. Shimon had died. He was married to Rivka the Chereshes. So what does Ruvain do? So Mayaisa Pikeach ba'al Pikachas. So what does Ruvain do? Kones. So he can do Yibum with Rivka, but not Chalitza. Then if they want to get divorced, they can get divorced. Meis Pikeach ba'al Pikachas. If Ruvain, the Pikeach, who's married to Sarah the Pikachas, dies, so now you have Shimon the Pikeach, who's married to Rivka the Chereshes. So Mayaisa Pikeach ba'al Chereshes. What does Shimon the Pikeach, who's married to Sarah, to Rivka the Chereshes, do? Well, he can either do Chalitza or Yibum with Sarah, right? Shimon's a Pikeach, Sarah's a Pikachas. They can do Yibum, they can do Chalitza, fine. So my love, midehu Pikeach meikara. Well, if Ruvain and Shimon, let's say Shimon who's married to Rivka, so if Shimon is a Pikeach meikara, he was a Pikeach the whole time, hinami Chereshes meikara. So let's say that Rivka is a Chereshes meikara v'katane, and what did we say? That if Shimon dies, so Ruvain Davka does Yibum with Rivka, but not Chalitza. V'katani konis in choletz lo. That Reuven can do Yibum with Rivka, but not Chalitza. So we see that even Chereshes meikara cannot do Chalitza midi area, to which the Gemara says meh. Hakadiisa v'akadiisa. Sure, Shimon is a Pikeach meikara, but Rivka is a Pikachas meikara, and then she became a Chereshes later. Esvei, Abaye then asks another kasha on Rabbah. Shnei achin. Oh, by the way, I don't know if I may have forgotten to point this out. It says Rave earlier, but you can read it as Rabbah, and it's at the end of the Gemara we're going to see that Dafka it's Rabbah. So Ezvei Abaye asks another kasha on Rabbah. Shnei achin. If you have two brothers, Reuven and Shimon, echad Pikeach ve'echad Cheresh. Reuven is a Pikeach. Shimon is a Cheresh. Nisuin shtei achayis, and they're married to two sisters, Sarah and Rivka. Achas Pikachas v'achas Chereshes. Sarah is a Pikachas, Rivka is a Chereshes. Reuven, the Pikeach, is married to Sarah, the Pikachas. Shimon, the Cheresh, is married to Rivka, the Chereshes. Meis Cheresh bal Chereshes. If Shimon the Cheresh dies, so Mayaisa Pikeach bal Pikachas. So what does Reuven the Pikeach do? He's married to Sarah the Pikachas, but now there's Rivka the Chereshes who needs to do Yibum. So, well, the thing is, Reuven is married to Sarah, who is Rivka's sister. So, Teitze Mishum Achos Isha. So Rivka goes and lives her best life because she's the sister of Sarah, who's married already to Reuven. Meis Pikeach Ba'al Pikachas. On the other hand, if Reuven dies, so now there's Zika between Shimon the Cheresh and Sarah the Pikachas. So Meis Pikeach Ba'al Pikachas, Mayaisa Cheresh Ba'al Cheresh. So what does Shimon the Cheresh do vis-a-vis Sarah the Pikachas? Motzi as Ishto beget. So he divorces Rivke the Chereshes, the Eishes Ochiv Asur Le'olam, and yet Sarah the Pikachas will be Asur forever. Right? So he divorces, right? Shimon the Cheresh needs to divorce Sarah the Chereshes because since there's a Yibum Midoraisa with Sarah the Pikachas, so he can't remain married to Rivke the Chereshes. So he has to divorce Rivke, but then once he divorces Rivke, Sarah becomes Achos Grushaso, so he can't marry Sarah either, and she's basically stuck. And now, so what do we see? He also can't do Chalitza with Sarah, because he's a Cheresh. So v'chitema hachinami b'pikeach b'achar kach nischarish. And if you're going to say, yeah, in hachinami, but it's talking about where he's a pikeach b'achar kach nischarish, and that's why he's unable to do yibum with Sarah. But if he was a cheresh meikar, so then he would be able to do. I don't know if I just said yibum, but I mean chalitza, right? It's because he was a pikeach b'achar kach nischarish. That's why he's unable to do chalitza with Sarah. But if he was a Cheresh may ikara, then he would be able to do chalitza with Sarah. But mimatzi mapik. But if we're saying that Shimon was a pikeach b'achar kach nischarish, but then he'd be unable to divorce Rivka the Chereshes, right? We said that when Reuven dies, so then Shimon needs to divorce Rivka, and then he's unable to do Yibum or Chalitza with Sarah. Now, if we're saying that he's unable to do Chalitza with Sarah because he was a Pikeach b'achar kach nischarish, but if that's the case, then he would be unable to divorce Rivke. Ve'atnan, because we learn in the Mishnah in Nischarsha, Yotzi, that if you have somebody who's married, right, and then his wife becomes a Chereshes, so then he could divorce her. Nishtat is lo Yotzi, but if she becomes like I guess, for lack of a better term, dumb, I guess. So then he's not able to be motzir. Nischarishu nishtate, if he became a cherish or a shote, lo yotzi olamis, he's unable to divorce his wife. No. So therefore, from the fact that we're saying that Shimon divorces Rivke, so then memele, we're talking about where he was a cherish meikara. That's why he's able to divorce Rivke. And we're saying that he's unable to do chalitza with Sarah, so we see that a cheresh meikare is unable to do chalitza. So rather, memele, it's talking about where Shimon was a cheresh meikare. Umidehu cheresh meikare hinami chereshes meikare. And if we're saying that Shimon is a cheresh meikare, so then Rivka is a chereshes meikare. Umidachayos chershos. And if we're saying that Sarah and Rivka, when they're sisters, we're talking about that when Rivka is a chereshes, so then meikara, so nachrios nami chereshes meikara. Then also earlier when we were talking about when Sarah and Rivka are not sisters, we're also talking about cheresh meikara utnan gabi nachrios. And what did we say in the situation when Reuven is married to Sarah, right? Reuven the pikeach is married to Sarah the pikachas, and Shimon the cheresh is married to Rivka the chereshes, and Sarah and Rivka are not married. So we say that if Shimon dies, so then kones in choletz lo, that Reuven davka does yibum with Rivke, he does not do chalitza, and that's talking about, as we just said, where she's a chereshes meikare, and we're saying that Reuven is unable to do chalitza with her, ishtik. And guess what? Rabbah did not have a response. I mean, how can you respond to such a well-developed and complex argument. I mean, he's probably still processing it, but unsurprisingly, Rabba was quiet. He did not have an answer to Abaye's kasha about, Rabba had said that a chereshes meikara is able to do chalitza, but Abaye seems to have just proven that a chereshes meikara is unable to do chalitza. Then when Abaye came to Rav Yosef, Amalei, so Rav Yosef says to Abaye, "My time tozve meha. How come you asked Rabba from that? After all, Rabba can answer to you. Achayos chershos meikare, nachrios pikchos v'achakach nischarshu. Sure, you proved that in the situation where Sarah and Rivka are sisters. Sure, you proved that when Sarah and Rivka are sisters, it's talking about where Rivka is a chereshes meikara. And you wanted to assume based on that also when Sarah and Rivka are not sisters, we're talking about chereshes meikara. But you could just answer that not necessarily. The sisters, sure, are chereshes meikara, but you could say that when they're not sisters, it's talking about pikachas v'acharkach nischarsha. So ella ibai lach leosve meha. Rather, this is you could ask Rabba a kasha from the following. In there's no way out of this kasha. Shnei achin chershin. If you have two brothers who are both deaf, who are both chershin, deaf mutes, nisuin shtei achayos pikchos, who are married to two sisters and they are pikchos. O shtei achayos chershos, or maybe both sisters were chershos. O shtei achayos achas pikachas v'achas chereshes, or the two sisters, one was a pikachas, the other was a chereshes. V'chein shtei achayos chershos. And similarly, if you have two sisters who are chershos, nesuis l'shnei achin pikchin, who are married to two brothers who are pikchin, or l'shnei achin chershin, or to two brothers who are chershin, or l'shnei achin echad pikach v'echad cheresh, or two brothers, one of whom is a pikach and one is a cheresh. All right. Hare elu pituris min hachalitza u min ha-yibum. So, if one of the brother dies, so we say that these sisters are pituris from chalitza and from yibum, right? Because they're sisters. Ve'im hayu nachrius, and if they were not sisters, yichnosu, then they can dafka do yibum. Ve'im ratzu lotzi yotziu, and if they want to later get divorced, they can, but they cannot do chalitza. Hey chidami, and what kind of chershus are we talking about? Ilema bepikhim levasof nischarshu. And if we're talking about where they were pikchim and then afterwards they became chershim, mimotzi mapke, then how would it be able to say that they could just do yibum and then later do get divorced? V'atzna nishtatis lo yotzi nischar, right? Nishtatis lo yotzi. That if she becomes a shota, so then he cannot divorce her. Nischar yeshuo nishtata. If he became a cheresh or he became a shota, he was pikach b'chakach nishtate. Or nischarish lo yotzi olamis, he cannot divorce her. So what do we see? So we had just said that in these cases, if they do yibum, they can later just get a divorce. But if we're talking about pikach b'charkach nischarish, then he wouldn't be able to give her a divorce. Elalav achershin meikar. Rather, it's talking about where they were cheresh meikar, and whereas umidehein cheresh meikar, and from the fact that the brothers are cheresh meikar, so inenami cheresh meikar, so then the sisters are also, we're talking about cheresh meikar. V'katani mayu nachrios yichnosu and yichotzu lo yufta d'rabba to yufta. And we're saying davka that if they were not sisters, then they could do yibum. And we're saying that it's talking about cheresh meikara, and we're saying that dafka they do yibum, they cannot do chalitza, and there you have it. It's a kasha on Rabba. Rabba had tried to make the argument that chershus meikar can do chalitza, but it seems to be an uphill battle, and that chershus meikar cannot do chalitza. And then Mistama, you have to answer our Mishnah that says that when you have these two kitanos, so they can do either yibum, right? If one of them does yibum or chalitza, then the other one can go live their best life. And then we say the same thing applies to chershos. That would dafka be yibum, but not chalitza. Friends, that was daf kuf yud Masechta Yevamos. That was really, we had to hold cup in that daf. The first part of the daf explored the machlokas between Rav and Shmuel about, does bia, that, if you have a ketana who then becomes an adult, does that bia make them married midoraisa? Or is it like, that's what Rav says, or is it like Shmuel says that the bia is based on the initial kiddushin, in which case they would still be married midorabanan until they davka have bia with the intention of being married midoraisa. And then we discussed the concept of that when we say that a cheresh and a chereshes are unable to do chalitza, is that davka when they got married they were not yet a cheresh and then they became a cheresh later, or is it even chereshes me'ikara? And Rabbi wanted to say that by chereshes me'ikara she would be able to do chalitza, but by the end of the daf we sort of brought proofs against that to say that even a chereshes me'ikara would be unable to do chalitza. Peace out.